And I'm going to introduce the person who is making it all happen, Carl Keller, who I will let him describe to you better what he does because I want to give him as much time as is possible. Carl, are you ready to go?
I am. Let me share my screen here. Okay, there we go. All right, can you guys see that? Can we see my screen?
Yeah.
Right, very good. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Ronke for dragging me into this project. She saw some things that I did for Rick McGee at Northwestern University and contacted me kind of over the transom to help her out with this project. And it's been a bit of a saga to kind of get it all together. So it was kind of pre-pandemic. So I really do appreciate being a part of this. So what I'm going to do today is go 1,000 miles an hour through the way that as a communication consultant, so I'm not a scientist. I've learned a lot about science over the last 15 years that I've been doing this kind of work, but I'm not a scientist. I'm a communication consultant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about how to think about the writing process, right? The actual putting of words down on paper. What does that mean? How do you think about that? Because you have to write it up, because you won't get an award, you won't advance your career unless you write well. So that's what we'll talk about today, but with a focus on NSF career submission. Now I'm talking a little bit about my background. I began my work with grant writers as part of Northwestern University's CLIMB program, Collaborative Learning and Integrated Mentoring the Biosciences. And I see Brian Aguado in the participant panel here. Brian was a member of that program some years ago. It's great to see you there, Brian. So Rick McGee was my mentor in this world. Rick is a very accomplished medical educator. He's Associate Dean for Faculty Recruitment and Professional Development at Feinberg. Great person. If you get a chance to meet him, you'll be rewarded by discussing things with him. He's, again, he was my mentor in that. He continues to do this work at Northwestern with his grant writing groups to help junior faculty with their grant submission work. So I really learned at his knee here. Okay. With that experience working with Rick, I developed a series of grant writing workshops for both the graduate school at Northwestern. I'm based in Evanston, Illinois, for the graduate school and the McCormick School of Engineering. NIH F31 and F32 grants, also K grants, and I did some work with National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowships. And I think Brian was an award winner in the Graduate Research Fellowship program. So that was my experience at Northwestern. That led to a series of grant writing workshops, which I continue to do at Rush University Medical School. At that program, it's part of the Rush mentoring program. I've done 13 workshops. Yeah, my workshops are 10 hours long, right? So I'm gonna give you like a 10-hour overview of a lot of what I do in the workshop. So I've done 13 of those since 2014. 73 individuals in my workshop have achieved funding. So there are the funding amounts that have occurred. Now, it's not because of me. I made it contribute. These are accomplished individuals, very good scientists. But I help them a lot, I think, in terms of organizing their material in such a way to be readable. I also continue to work with faculty one-on-one at Northwestern. And in fact, after this session today, I'll be reviewing an NIH K grant submission from one of the faculty members at Rush University and helping her with that. Finally, like I said, I'm a communication consultant. I'm not a scientist. I have a consulting firm. This is where I do the vast majority of my work. Sorry about the landscapers next door. I can't believe that timing is so awful. We help businesses and particularly pharmaceutical companies in the writing that they do. So we do a bunch of training for these pharmaceutical firms you see on the screen. These have been long-term clients of ours to help them. And I don't know whether any of you are familiar with the pharmaceutical business. Maybe you've spent some time in it or know people who do. But the pharmaceutical business is a document-driven business. In order to be successful in the pharmaceutical business, you have to write regulatory documents, huge filings that the FDA and the EMA and all the health authorities need to approve. So these are some of the specific internal and external documents that we've done training on, some of which are extremely scientific in nature. So we have a lot of experience in this world about how to communicate your complex science clearly. And that's what we'll talk about today. As part of this project, I'm going to do, or I've actually created the PowerPoint decks for these. The videos are not yet done. They'll be done early next week. And Ronke will be back in touch with you so you can watch the video. So I'm going to give you a 50,000-foot overview of these videos. Some of them are fairly lengthy. Okay? So the first video is about deconstructing the summary page. So the idea is you provide a rhetorical breakdown of the winning grants. Right? So you'll see, and I'll do that as we go forward in this presentation. So the idea, you need to think about your grant as a rhetorical structure. And if you think about it as a rhetorical structure, then you'll have an organizing principle by which the grant will communicate clearly. Right? And we focus on the winning grants. The second video is all going to be about the big structure of the project description, focusing on the merit criteria. We'll look at how specific aims and objectives work together to what we call logic flow. Do the aims make sense? Do they cohere logically? Again, we'll use winning examples. The third part is what I call 8 principles for readable writing. So this is all the granular stuff related to writing. Like, how do you write a really good sentence? How do you write a really good paragraph? How do you structure the prose so someone can sit and read it fast? Right? Because that's what you want. The faster that a reviewer or a reader can read your document, the more likely, there's a halo effect, like go right through it. Very easy to see, right? No matter how complicated it is, no matter how technical it is or detailed it is. So these are techniques that will hold you in good stead, not only for your NSF career submission, but also for any of the other publications that you write for. And then finally, I kind of called out from a bunch of winning grants. Ronke, the first thing that happened when I worked with Ronke here, I said, Ronke, I need to see winners, right? I need to see who won, because I won't be able to really talk about how to structure things and how to write about things unless I see the winners. So I've called out a whole bunch of different phrases and textual elements denuded of their science, right, that you can use as inspiration for your own unique submission. Okay? So that's the 4-part aspect of the videos that I will produce. So I'm going to go through them real fast. But first, all of you guys were really good students, right? You wouldn't be here unless you were. You're exceptional students. Okay? You probably thought, right? Oh, I got my PhD. I'm going to go teach. I'm not going to do anymore. No one's going to grade me anymore. I'm going to do the grading. Hate to break it to you. You are no longer a student, but you will be graded. You will be graded. Okay. And because you're a good student, you give the teacher what the teacher wants. And your NSF reviewers are your teachers. They're going to grade you. Okay. So you have to ask the following questions. What should I do to get the teachers to decide that I'm a winner, right? You give the teachers what they want. The panelists told you today what they want, right? Next, how do I know what the teacher, well, they've told you. They've told you what they want. And then finally, you say to yourself, well, the guidance is so broad, I have to write 16 pages, I have to do a budget and all the other stuff, I put it all together. How do I make sure that what I write gives them what they want? You look at the winners. What did the winners do? Okay, adapt what they did to your unique submission. You learn from the winners. So I would urge you, if there are other people who have won NSF Career Awards who are your friends or your colleagues and they won, look at what they did. How did they do it? Right? You don't necessarily copy them, but you use them as models. Here's what the teacher wants. The teacher tells you what they want, right here. Tell you exactly what they want. So I've distilled what the teachers want into 2 simple lists right here, okay? One's from the Early Career Award and one's from the PCAS, PECASC award, because when you, as you know, when you submit an Early Career Award, you become eligible for the second award, right? Which you don't apply for, you just get awarded. And there it is, role models, You're an academic role model. Research education, you lead advances. That piece of terminology is important. You should have leadership in, a whole emphasis on leadership, okay? Education research. Innovative research, the panelists talked about that. It has to be innovative, has to be novel, okay? Community service through scientific leadership, education, community outreach, and commitment to STEM equity, right? Those are your requirements, and all your writing should be aligned to these requirements. Now, let's look at a winner, okay? If you look at these, look at this winner, we'll look at this submission, and we'll focus on the rhetorical structure that this particular winner uses. We have a second winner we'll look at too, right? How they align with these requirements and other, what we call rhetorical moves. So when you write a piece of prose, you move from sentence to sentence to sentence to sentence. And you need to understand the movement from sentence to sentence to sentence as a set of moves, right? Like a dance move, a workout move, okay? So I'll address that in the first video. Okay? You need to get out of your science mindset when you write. You need to think like a writer, right? When you think like a writer, you know what every sentence, the purpose of that sentence is. What is its function, right? And you should be able to identify the purpose of the function. You should be able, anything that you write, you should look at the sentence as this sentence serves this function, function X. This sentence serves that function, function Y, right? So you have to be very conscious of the functions that each of your sentences or groups of sentences serve, okay? So let's look at the opening section of this winning submission. It's about identifying the role of cross-family signaling in angiogenesis. First sentence, the directed control of angiogenesis remains a pressing need due to its involvement in the pathology of over 70 diseases. Simple sentence, very easy to understand. One of the panelists, I can't remember who, said something like, you're not going to have experts necessarily in your field reading your document. So this kind of context-setting sentence and significance-establishing sentence is very critical. And it's got to be understandable by anybody, right? Okay. Next, we make the move right into innovative research in that second sentence. A promising approach for angiogenesis control involves going beyond the traditional emphasis on vascular endothelial-faction, okay? Right into that, okay? Next, 2 key studies support cross-actioning signaling. So it's the research contribution from the applicant in the field. That's the next set of sentences. Then the complication, the gap, the problem, the issue. Despite this mounting evidence, the role of cross-axis signaling in angiogenesis has not been pursued. Okay. So it really says, oh, it's a totally open area. That's a signal. Next, we have the aim summary, the hypothesis, and how the research will lead advances. My objective in this career proposal is to pioneer a shift towards, and notice how they underline and make that italicized, okay? Which is fine, you can do it. You don't overdo that, but you can certainly point to that, okay? And it talks about the 3 aims. Here's another winner. Look at what they do, same thing, right? General context, establishes significance. Mucosal tissues are the major portal of entry and initial sites of infection for many infectious pathogens. Therefore, a vaccination strategy that can elicit strong cellular and humoral immune responses in mucosal tissues is urgently needed. Right? Then we get our complication, our issue. However, there's currently no methodology available that can achieve this. And the discussion goes on for a while about that. Then the innovative research element, the PI's long-term goal. What's interesting is that in this particular winner, but not the other winner in the summary page, it talks about long-term goal. Okay. That's a good phrase to use. What's your long-term research goal? What's your long-term career goal? The panelists talked about that. So that particular phrase is useful. Okay. PI's long-term goal is to develop a novel biomaterial-based approach for vaccination against infectious pathogens. Again, nice, simple sentence. Right? Anybody can understand it. And then this particular winner devoted an entire paragraph to the hypothesis and aim summary and laid it all out. All right, see the pattern? So we'll return to the first winner now, the angiogenesis one. Right? Integrated leadership and integrating research and education. By the way, use the word integrated. Use it. Right? Now, if you're doing something that's integrated, it had better be integrated, right? You just don't use the word for something that's nonsense, of course, but use those terms. Spit back the terms that are used in the recommendations. Use that terminology. Yeah. Integrate. Then there's a commitment to STEM equity. It's integrated into that paragraph of integration, right? And then a leadership in integrating education and research. So that leadership, I'm leading advances. I'm leading, right? You're a leader. Use the word leader. Use the word led. Make sure that happens. Right? Now, the intellectual merit and the project summary of our angiogenesis one is science focused, right? Intellectual merit, right? Lays that out. Then commitment to STEM equities and broader impacts. Always aligning to the criteria. The rhetoric always matches the requirements. So now we see the entire rhetorical pattern here, right? General context, innovative research, research contribution from the applicant in the field. The panelists talked about that, right? If you don't necessarily need to have it, but if you have it, put it in there, and it should be in the summary page for sure. Gap in knowledge, the summary hypothesis, the leadership, commitment, leadership, intellectual merit, commitment, innovative research. So you notice I can identify the function of every sentence or sets of sentence to the requirements, but the rhetorical structure is all there, easy to see. And as a writer, you need to be able to do that. This is my context setting sentence. This is my sentence on innovation. This is my sentence on the gap. Should be able to identify them immediately. Right? Note the phrasing used, right? Going beyond the traditional emphasis, pioneering a shift toward, broadening participation. I have led efforts, catalyze a perspective shift. Proposal will provide direct insight into, opening new avenues of research, addressing key challenges. See how that works? All those phrases are used to align with those recommendations to what the teacher wants. Okay? Here's the other winner. Right? Totally different subject. It's all about vaccines, whereas the other one's about angiogenesis, different subject matter. The subject matter doesn't really apply at all. It's the structure. That's what you want to try to achieve. Context, established significance, gap in knowledge, innovative research, hypothesis and aim summary. All those rhetorical patterns are there, and we can identify them. And you as a writer should be able to read your summary page and say, that's my gap. That's my innovation part. That's my general context. That's how you set it up so it's easy to read and easy to follow. Here's the phrasing used on that one. Long-term goal, develop novel, proposed project will advance science, generate new information, shed light on new, broadening the scope, new knowledge gained, significant impact, seek to integrate research with educational activities. Different subject matter, same rhetorical structure. Now let's look at them both side by side. There they are. On the left is our angiogenesis one. On the right is our vaccine component one. Look at the commonalities. Opening presents a context and significance very clearly, can be read by anybody, understood by anybody. Gap in knowledge is clear. Significance is clear. Hypothesis explicitly stated. Right? Emphasis on innovation and advances, commitment to STEM, leadership, and integrating education research. There are some differences. The angiogenesis one had a research contribution, both their own and the field itself. And as some of the panelists said, you don't necessarily need to have that, but if you have it, put it in there. Okay. And an explicitly stated long-term research goal. So you should be able to look at your own aim, your own summary page and recognize these specific things. If you don't have them, if it's missing, right, in the summary page, get it in there. Okay. Meet these rhetorical component requirements, and then you'll be more likely to meet the requirements of your teacher. Okay. So your challenge is to identify these for your unique submission. Okay. What's the big picture for your research? Why is it important? What's the problem, the roadblock, the unknown? What do you believe is the answer to the complication, to that roadblock, that unknown? Has your previous work or work of others contributed? How? Right? Will this research lead advances in the field? How will it do that? What specific activities have you done or will you do to integrate your research into community activities outside the lab, in your school or outside of it? What specific activities have you done or will do to promote equity goals? Right? It's a checklist. Now, your reviewers who were on the initial panel, they kind of poo-poo checklists a little bit, right? And that's okay, right? You don't want to be mechanical, but on the other hand, this is a kind of checklist of the things you need in your research summary, because it's arguably the most important part of your submission. It's the thing that they will remember. They want the big picture. I think Steve said, send me a page, one page, right? In one of his responses about, should you belong to this particular study section, right? That's what people want. People want one page. Give them the best one page you can, right? But this gives you some guidance on how you might be able to structure it. All right. So let's touch a little bit about the big structure and the subject of the second video in the series that I'm producing, looking at two winners, okay? We'll look at the angiogenesis one again, and we'll look at another one, which is about heart valve disease. Okay. Step back, look at the big structure. We have different sections, we have background and significance, and every submission is different in terms of what you're going to, how much text you're going to devote to specific aspects of your submission. Okay. But I think it's always good to step back and do this with your submission. Like, look at your overall big structure. What's it look like, right? Is it hanging together? Does it make sense? Is there a pattern to the structure? So in other words, when I read my proposed work, does everything look the same? So aim 1 looks the same. Aim 2 looks the same. Aim 3 looks the same. This particular winning proposal that Ronki shared with me had a very specific section on possible difficulties and alternative approaches. And I think Steve mentioned that as something that you might want to include. Right? The other winner didn't have any of that. Okay? Still won, but didn't have any of that. But it's probably good advice to include something like that. Right? So here is the heart valve one. So take a moment and look at the two structures. They're different, right? Very different. But they have a research plan or proposed work, right? They do have that section. Okay. Different structures. You have a lot of freedom here about how you're going to structure it, but your structure had better be consistent, whatever one you pick. Right? These certainly aren't the only options that you could have. Right? So different structures, titles, terminology, but they also have elements in common. Right? Also have elements in common. Right? The angiogenesis submission combines background and significance into one large section. Right? While the heart valve submission both addresses the background separately and integrates it into each research objectives. Which one's right, which one's better, that's not the issue. Right? Pick the one that makes sense for you, but be consistent in your use of it. Okay? If you're going to talk about background and significance in one section, you're not necessarily going to talk about it in your proposed work section, but you can integrate it into a specific section as well, right? You have your choice, make a choice, but be consistent in your choice. So if you notice the one on the right, the heart valve one, every section, background, motivation, supporting data, experimental design, methods, potential outcome, every section is like that, rinse and repeat. Right? So when your reviewers read that one section, they go to the next one, the same pattern exists. Okay? So make sure you replicate that pattern, whatever one you choose, right? This one, the other one, any other pattern that you might see. That's why it's a good idea to look at other winners besides the ones that we're reviewing here. The more you look at them, the more you say, I see what they're doing. I can do that, or I can adapt that, or I can repurpose that. So it gives you some idea of how you structure things. Right? This is different from NIH. Right? So an NIH grant, some of you, I think one person said that they won an NIH Early Innovator Award. Right? There's an expectation in the NIH that you're going to have specific sections. Right? You're going to have a significance section. You're going to have an innovation section. You're going to have an approach section. But that's what you're going to have. NSF is just freedom. You can do what you want. Okay. So on the one hand, that makes it harder. right? Because you don't have to write, you have to deal with significance, but you don't really necessarily write a significant section. Although if you notice, the angiogenesis one did exactly that. All right, so let's talk about aims, okay? Aims themselves. So the ones that, some of the winners that Ronke gave me were, they talked about objectives or research tasks or aims, whatever label you apply to them, okay? So I'm going to ask you guys to do a little contribution here, okay? And that's this. What is an aim? What is an aim? Write in chat. If you had to define what an aim is, what is it? Goal, target, specific goal with measurable outcomes. Oh, somebody has read my presentation. Sometimes you need to ask yourself the fundamental questions, right? In life, what is something? What is an aim, right? What is it? Okay. Expected outcome from a directed set of tasks. Right? So you guys got the hang of it, okay? There are characteristics of an aim, okay? It's a research task, and it has the following characteristics. First, a successful aim supports the researcher's implied or specific central hypothesis. Each of the aims supports the general hypothesis. Next, an aim has its own implied or specific working or sub-hypothesis. When I teach my NIH grant writing, I tell people, tell them directly what your sub-hypothesis is, right? Because every aim is also a test, okay? It's a test of your sub-hypothesis of that particular aim that rolls up to the bigger objective of your research proposal, the bigger hypothesis. Again, aim leads to a measurable research outcome. If you can't measure it, you're not doing science, right? That's obvious. A proven aim provides new insight and information. Okay, let me ask you this. How much research fails? Write it in chat. Give me a percentage. How much research fails? Look at those percentages. Okay, right. So a proven aim provides new insight and information, right? The number is a lot. It's greater than 50%, right? Okay. That's just like, and your reviewers know that. They know that that's the case. Everybody knows that, okay? So a proven aim, great. You prove an aim, fantastic. That provides new insight and information. What should a disproven aim do? What should a disproven aim do? All right. Now, one disproven aim shouldn't invalidate other aims. They are independent, okay? That's the ideal. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's the ideal, right? Because dependency of your aims, right, makes the remaining part of your research suspect, right? Suppose you fail in your first one, right? So one disproven aim shouldn't invalidate other aims. They're independent. Or any independent aims have a high probability of being successful and other aims follow logically, right? And a disproven aim provides new insight and information. You learn a lot more. You learn as much about the negative as you do about the positive, right? So your reader should be able to read your aim and go, yeah, I see that, right? I see what you're trying to do. If it fails, oh, we'll learn something, right? That's always useful. All aims have what I call a logic flow, okay? And each aim should be feasible given the time and money allotted, right? The panelists talked about that. So that's it. Those are the characteristics of aims, right? What an aim is, how an aim should work. Okay? So let's take a look at the angiogenesis one, and we'll see how that works, okay? Here's the hypothesis for the angiogenesis one. Aim number one, to measure cross-axis binding and concentrations. Okay. There are 4 parameters needed to do this. The implied sub-hypothesis here is we can use these 4 parameters to provide an accurate measure of cross-axis binding and concentrations. We can do that. Okay. Next aim, to construct cross-axis computational models. Okay. So the idea is we can develop a deterministic computational model in a 3-step process that can predict cross-axis signaling. Okay. So we're going to measure, and then we're going to develop the model, computational model. Aim 3, predict the role of cross-axis signaling in angiogenesis. This is the lab part. So we're going to build the model, and then in the lab, we're going to test the model. Okay? In vitro models and experimental activity will validate the computational models. Okay? There it is. We have logic here. There's a logic flow to this. Okay? You can determine each specific aim by asking this question, our outcome ideally will be blank, right? You got to fill in the blank. So aim 1, to measure cross-axis binding and concentrations. Our outcome ideally will be, we'll get an accurate, useful measurement of ligand receptor cross-axis signaling. That's what we'll get. Models will have the potential predictive power. Third one, in vitro models will validate the computational model. If you can construct your own aims in this way and this kind of high-level discussion, right, any intelligent person in the science field will be able to read and understand it, no matter how technical it is. And so you should be able to do this kind of analysis with your own work. So it is readable. And we'll measure each, derive each outcome by these methods. They're very specific about the methods, right? Those are the methods for aim number 1. I extracted those out. Those are the methods for number 2, extracted those out. Those for the methods for number 3, extracted those out. When I do scientific presentation consulting about, in your research group, how do you do this? This is a great slide to use, right? There it is. You see the entirety of the research proposal on one slide. Now let's see and look at each aim as independent or logically connected. Okay. Our outcomes ideally will be those 3 outcomes. That's our ideal outcome. Okay. What are our possible results? Now that you look at the 3 ideal outcomes, can you see what the possible results might be? Can you? Right? They may be very accurate, right? Maybe somewhat accurate, may not be accurate at all. However, what's interesting about this proposal, and this often occurs in proposals, where the first aim is largely done, or they've done a lot of work in this area and they're taking a new twist on that aim. And that's what this particular applicant did, right? The previous research made it highly similar successful activities. Success is probably very high here on this one, even though it's effectively the aim that the other ones depend upon, okay? What are the possible results on our model? Well, it may be highly predictive, and maybe somewhat predictive. It may not be at all predictive, right? Those are the possible outcomes, okay? Now, here's the deal. He can make the models. That's not a problem. He can make them, right? We won't really test the models until we get to aim 3. So the idea is the aim 3 is like preparation. Aim 2 is like preparation for aim 3. And now the in vitro models will validate the computational models. Well, what will happen? It may totally validate, it may partially validate, it may not validate at all, right? It's all a matter of degrees here, right? Okay. So now you see it. Oh. Does it meet this criteria? Yes. Did each aim have its own implied or specific or working sub-hypothesis? Yes. Did it lead to measurable research outcome? They all did. Proven aim provides new insight information? Yes. One disproven aim shouldn't invalidate the other aims. They are independent, or, right, any dependent aims have a high probability of being successful and other aims follow logically. That's really what applies here. Disproven aim provides new insight and information? Yes. All aims have a logic flow? Yeah, we all went back to that, right? Here's the logic flow, right? And each aim should be feasible given the time and money allotted. We didn't talk about objective number 8, but remember the panelists did, okay? All right. So the final video in the series, and I won't go over each of the principles in detail, but I'll lay them out for you, is how do you actually write readable English prose? What are the principles that you use? Okay? Here are the 8 principles. Use transition words like however, therefore, as a result. Pick your terms and stick to them. Don't change your terms around for variety's sake. Next, there's a linguistic principle, which is sequence old to new. When you connect sentences, orient your readers with older, previously introduced concepts before you connect them back to new ones. Avoid starting sentences that come out of, with concepts that come out of nowhere. When you write a sentence, put the verb as close to the beginning of the sentence as possible. Don't put your verb at the end of the sentence. Put it as close to the beginning of the sentence, a nice light subject followed by the verb and then all the heavy information afterwards. This will make your prose immediately readable. Right? Verbs, use verbs. Watch out for the nominalizations, right? The words that end in ION, ANC, ENC, MENT. Get rid of those words, especially if they're hiding verbs. Okay? Don't say we did an evaluation of, we evaluated. Okay? Cut your words. Every word is precious in your application. Every word is precious. But the fewer you use, the more you can talk about what you're doing. Okay? So test your cuts. In that video, I'll give you some very specific advice about how to do that. But here's your metric. If these words are gone, is the meaning different and incomplete? If the answer is no, it's a candidate for cutting. All right, signal an enumerated list. See this all the time. Tell your reader how many things are coming, right? We're going to use 3 methods. We evaluated 6 studies. Okay? Be very specific before you introduce them. Okay? Watch out for isolated demonstrative pronouns, this, that, these, and those. They are ambiguous. Your readers have to guess to what they're related to. They have what's known in English teacherese as an unclear antecedent. Right? And then finally, break up strings of prepositional phrases. Look at your prose. If you have 3 prepositions in one sentence, that's too many. Break it up, right? No more than 3. It makes it very difficult for a reader to grasp how the concepts are related when you have of, by, for, in, though, all strung together, right? These aren't the only principles that really apply to readable writing, but they're the big winners, right? If you apply these principles consistently to your writing, whether it's in a submission or any papers you want to publish, your readers will thank you because they'll be able to read right through much more quickly, right? Right, so the other thing that I did is I put together a sampling of phrases. So I looked at the winners that Ronke shared with me, and I said, well, what kind of phrasing are they using? So here they are, right? Ways to think about your complication or your unknowns. How to articulate what you're doing is novel. Advancement, right? Phrases that people use. And these, again, are denuded of the science content, right? But you can see them there. And then finally, education and research, how you integrate those activities, right? Last but not least, verbs that apply to your aims and the research tasks as part of your aims. So here's a list of verbs that I've seen in a lot of the grants that I've read over the past dozen years doing this kind of work. Right? These are good verbs to use. Determine is the standard one, right? It's the safe choice. Can't go wrong with that. Right? Correlate works if you're identifying relationships that provide new knowledge. Right? They provide new knowledge, so it should be attached to novelty. Explore should generally be avoided, right? Because it implies kind of a fishing expedition. And then finally, verify should probably be avoided for a separate aim. It may apply a check on something already completed, right? You should verify what you're doing within the aim itself, right? But these are all kind of useful verbs that you can purpose for your own submission. All right, so that's the overview of writing, and I really look forward to participating in your breakout rooms when those occur. And I'll pass the baton back to Ronke.
Okay, thank you. So initially we had a break scheduled for now, followed by a Q&A, but I'm seeing a bunch of questions here. So if you want to do the Q&A followed by the break, we can do that.
Okay.
So some of you who have posted, why don't you ask some of your questions? Or I can read them, whatever your preference. Okay, so there's some questions to, some people don't think the aims seem to be independent. I think that you had said independent or.
Yeah, independent or, right? They have to be logically connected, right? So I wanted that was an interesting winning submission in that the aims were not independent. But if you can make your aims independent and convey that they're independent, that's a plus. Right? The slides will be posted. Yeah.
Yes, I will post all of these slides after. I cannot do it while.
The slides are also there.
Yeah, so I posted many slides already today. Thank you, Rizal, for noticing that. But not all of them are posted yet, and the videos will be posted. Mm-hmm. I think, Erica, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. So thank you. This was really helpful, and I was taking lots of notes for every single section that you highlighted. I had a question particularly about structure and the use of objectives for your educational or broader impact. So a lot of the career examples that I've read, part of the broader impact or outreach has been represented in the form of an aim or an objective. And I was wondering if you could speak to that in terms of strategy.
You know, it was very hard to make out your question. I'm
sorry, I can repeat it.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, go ahead.
Is that better if I?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, that's much better.
Okay, sorry, I was speaking softly. So I was wondering, sometimes in the career examples that I've read, people have included an objective or aim for their educational or outreach. And I was wondering if that would be a recommended strategy, or if you could comment on the inclusion of an aim around education or outreach for the NSF career.
The examples that Ronke provided me, all the aims were science related. They were not, they had nothing to do with education. I would defer to the NSF panelists on that, whether that is a plus or minus or neutral, one way or the other. I honestly don't know.
Stephanie, if you're here, do you have anything you can say to that?
Sure. So I think probably neutral is the answer. You know, as Erica pointed out, some do that. Some have specific aims for their education and outreach component, and others do not. So I think it's dependent on the content there. The content might be there without a specific objective tied to it.
Mm-hmm. There you go. I would, yeah, again, I would defer to your panelists on that.
Are there any other questions, or do you guys want to go for a break?
Yeah.
Oh, I had a quick question regarding how the proposals were broken down as far as the amount of space that was allotted for the different sections. Do you have anything to comment on that in regards to like people spending more or less time on certain pieces of information relative to where they could have perhaps, utilized space better for another part of the document compared to another?
There's no right answer on this one, right? I mean, I think every situation is different. When I teach the NIH grant writing workshop, I use two winners. One has a significance and innovation section that is a paragraph, and one has a significance and an innovation section that's 2 pages. And what's interesting about that in that particular sort of comparing example, that's exactly what I did when I do my NIH grant writing seminar, is to say it depends, right? It's kind of a non-answer. One of the things that may be a bit of a challenge is, where do you do your literature review? How do you do that, right? So the angiogenesis one did his literature review in the background and significance page, right? 2.5 pages on that. There was a lot of background that he had to go through. The person who wrote the heart valve one integrated the background and literature review in the background section, and had specific literature that was aligned with each of the aims. So every situation is different. The most important thing is to be consistent within your research plan or proposed work. That's the key advice I would give. Don't, if you organize your aims one way, don't change your organization in your second aim and your third aim. Keep it consistent. And then make some decisions about where you're going to do your literature review. How's it going to be integrated with your discussion? And those are decisions you make. Writing is, as you guys know, right? Writing is really hard. It's one of the higher order cognitive skills out there. It's very difficult. But the more you can step back and see structure and organizational patterns, the easier it will be, right? It won't eliminate how hard it is, but it will be easier.
So I have a question. Could you go back to your slide where you're breaking down the, let's see if it's dependent or not?
Okay. Go ahead to that. This one?
No, the one where you said note underneath. Yeah. No, that's not it. It's the one where it was underneath where it said, note,
oh, yeah.
This one has high probability of success, note. And so I think,
yeah,
okay, so this is a rare case, right, where you said that they're dependent. And so can you discuss a little bit more why you believe they got away with it? Because I think we went through this a little quickly.
Yeah, because you'd have to read the grant itself. He makes a very persuasive case that, hey, I've done a lot of this work in cross-axis signaling, right? But I'm really looking at these other aspects of cross-axis signaling. It really built upon some previous research, right? But it definitely was generating new territory. So the likelihood of this being achieved is very high, okay? And then once that's done, I mean, the other aims are kind of dependent on that one, right? They are kind of independent. The 2 and 3 are independent. But the ideal situation is to have your aims to be independent. That's the ideal situation, no question about it. But sometimes things need to be built on something else, right? One of the examples I use in my NIH one, one of the reasons that person was an F31 grant, one of the reasons that one of my students in one of my grant writing sessions is that the first aims work was largely done, right? Now, I would defer to the panelists on that. If you have an aim that is largely complete, your first aim is largely complete, is that positive, negative, or neutral?
I would say that's a critique of the panel. And some common ones you might hear are, the most interesting part is already done. So I think NSF is a little bit more high risk, high reward. We're willing to take more of a risk, and NIH is perhaps a little bit safer in their approach.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? Yeah, you guys emphasize that on the panel, right? That we're betting on you guys, right? That's what we're doing, to be highly successful researchers in your long-term career, right? Whereas NIH is like very translational. Right? You really have to have a translational. You could have a long-term objective that is more translational than your short-term ones, but they had better see, for example, that in the NIH world, yeah, I can see where this will go to provide a translational benefit for.
Okay, are there any more questions? We can go to our break.
Yeah.
Or
yeah, I'll be going in and out of breakout rooms to see what you guys are doing, and look forward to seeing that.
Okay, so why don't we take our break? And I think we pretty much went through the Q&A, unless people want to do a Q&A on the other side too. But when we return, we can then go to our breakout rooms.
All right, very good.
Okay.
Thank you, Ronke.